There's nothing worse than knowing that you're trapped in a harmful relationship but can't seem to get out. What is a trauma bond, and why does it make acting on our behalf so difficult? In this podcast, we're going to explore the role mental confusion and fear play in creating an intense bond with the one who's harming us. Thank you so much for joining me today on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy, a mental health specialist and a narcissistic abuse survivor. Please leave us a review and let us know what you think of the podcast, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'd like to get your opinion on something. I've been considering offering a subscriber-only podcast that offers perks like ad-free episodes, the ability to submit questions and have them answered live. Maybe there's another perk that you'd love to see me offer. If you're interested, please drop me a comment on one of my social media accounts or send me an email. I'd love to hear what you think. So let's listen in to this replay of a TikTok Live. I've been thinking a lot about how much I didn't understand what it would be like to be in a toxic relationship. That even though I'd spent 20 years listening to counseling problems, listening to clients talk about all sorts of issues, because my relationship was relatively healthy, I really didn't have a clue. And here's the other wild part. I grew up in a dysfunctional home with chronic gaslighting. Yes, so I was chronically gaslit as a kid. But, when you're a kid, you can do things that you can't do when you're in a marriage. Like I would go take long walks. And we worked on a farm, dairy farm. So I would go off and do my chores. And I would hide in my room and read a book. I wasn't in the constant throes of family time. I wasn't trying to negotiate complex adult relationships. I was just surviving an uncomfortable home. But when I got into the marriage that was toxic, the second marriage, it was a completely different experience. I had no idea for the first year, which is when we dated and got engaged, that I had met somebody who was being deceptive. I had no idea he was living a second life. It never even crossed my mind. My first marriage was with somebody who, though not perfect, actually quite difficult in some ways. I kind of ran the home most of the time with him, and he worked and provided well for us. But when he came home, he expected to be off, and he left everything to me. So it wasn't easy. I felt lonely. I wasn't completely satisfied. I would say it was wearing me out. But my first husband, Brad, was a man of his word. He told the truth, always. And I never doubted him. I never once assumed he stepped out on me. He brought home his stubs, his paychecks was dumped right into the checking account. He trusted me to pay bills, to manage the kids. It was a relationship built on trust. And we really commingled our life. We were together 33 years, and we commingled our life at every level. So the idea that somebody would come into a relationship with ulterior motives, that would not actually perceive the relationship as a joint venture, that it was actually competitive. This was the piece I really didn't understand, that it was competitive, meaning that he was jealous of my accomplishments. He viewed me from a position of distrust, like I might be out to get him, like he had to watch his own back. And he really viewed this from the perspective that it was his job to take care of his needs. He was not going to bring himself into this relationship and rely on the relationship to provide for his needs, which was totally the antithesis of what I had with my first marriage. So to me, this was just, I couldn't even conceive of it, because it was, even in my dysfunctional home, my parents worked as a team. They really worked as a team. I had no clue that there could be this type of a predatory, antagonistic style of relating to a partner. I likened it, in fact, during the middle of when we were starting to break up, I once said to him, do you know, because he didn't grow up in America, I said, do you know the Hokey Pokey song? And he kind of didn't really know. And I said, well, I described it, how you stand in a ring and you go in a circle and you put your right arm in, you put your left arm in. I said, but at the end, you put your whole self in. I said, it's like, I never get you to do that. You never put your whole self in. You're only just putting a right arm in temporarily, and then maybe you'll put in a left arm temporarily. But it's never all you. You are always holding a part of yourself back. So when I discovered 2 months into the marriage, because of a woman writing me a letter and saying, hey, I want you to let you know that you've been spotted. She actually didn't tell me these details until after the marriage was over, but you've been spotted together. And I didn't know this, but I've been dating the guy you married. He and I have been dating 3 months and we've been having sex together. And sorry to break the news. And she was a little cruel, a little crass. She said, I guess the joke's not just on me, it's on you too, which is, you could tell her anger, her hostility, that she was being duped and that she didn't really care a whole lot about my feelings and the fact that she was devastating me, breaking my whole world apart by telling me this news. Now, I'm thankful she told me, but I remember it was early in the morning and the last night of our delayed honeymoon. Can you imagine that? I learned this on the last night of our delayed honeymoon we took 2 months after we got married. And I remember laying at 4 a.m. in the morning, first of all, feeling like literally like there's two snow globes of worlds, realities. There was the reality of I thought that I had with this person for over a year. And everything I knew and everything he told me and our lunches during his work week and the way he came over and had sandwiches and how we got engaged and how he took business trips and how I would pray for him and be so concerned during his business trips and all of that, this way of living that I thought. And then there was this world she just presented me with proof. She provided evidence that I could not refute, that proved she knew this man, that she had been in the car and seen my belongings, seen the wedding gift I had given him because he put it on her wrist and she accurately described it. I felt like these two snow globes of the world she presented and the world that I've been living literally came together, smashed. And for a moment, no world existed. There was no world. There wasn't the world that I'd had, and there wasn't the world. I didn't know the other world. And I literally lost time. My mind went white with static, and I lost time. I don't know how long. I don't know how long. I know that at 6 a.m., roughly 2 hours later, I woke him up and said, hey, someone texted me and said, she knows you. You know what his reaction was, which is a completely guilty reaction. It's like, stop talking to her. He knew. So as I've been thinking about all of this and thinking about the upcoming webinar with Dr. Kristen Milstead, which if you have not gotten her book, I highly recommend it. Her book is called Why Can't I Just Leave? Why Can't I Just Leave? She is, I would say, Dr. Milstead is one of there's a few people in the world I consider leading experts on cognitive dissonance. I would say Dr. Romney, Sandra Brown, who wrote the Women Who Love Psychopaths. But Dr. Milstead, I would put right up there. She's actually a researcher, sociologist. She dissects what happens to her. You know, in my book, Love You More, The Harrowing Tales of Lies, Sex Addiction, and Double Cross, I tell you my story, what happened to me, but I don't really dissect it. But she spends the bulk of the book, her book, Why Can't I Just Leave, explaining what is cognitive. She tells you the word cognitive dissonance, which I think, I wish I hadn't even say that word to you because I think it's so confusing. But she explains why we spend so much time in these relationships, why we can't get out, what causes this sense of disconnection and paralysis and confusion and fog and indecisiveness, why we get fixed in these relationships and can't get out. And even after we get out of them, why we continue to have them take up mental space in our head. I learned, I'm going to go ahead and share this because I don't want to be controlled by it, but I learned that even though I'm 3 years out of my toxic relationship, he's blocked on all of the platforms that I can. He doesn't actually have social media platforms, but I've learned he's listening to the podcast. It's been devastating to feel like one of my spaces has been intruded and invaded by someone who's 3 years post me. He's like, dude, get a life, move on. But yet they do this. They don't go away, and they take these mental space from us and consume us. Why does this happen? Why mentally we get trapped and fixed and paralyzed? Why a trauma bond gets developed. In fact, she said, maybe it wasn't her that said this, Sandra Brown said this in her recent seminar on her study of 600 pathological love relationships, with this fascinating study. She said, you want to break the trauma bond? You need to resolve the cognitive dissonance. What is cognitive dissonance? It's the confusion. It's the mental confusion you're feeling in these relationships. It's the mental confusion. Because what happens is there's duality. There's a duality that happens. You think you know who you met. It's who they presented. You don't realize that it really wasn't who they say they are. You met a mask that they created in order for you to like them, choose them, in order for them to use you. All a variety of reasons. There's lots of reasons why people create a mask through love bombing, but you don't think that that's not a real person. Yeah, you know they're putting their best foot forward. Everybody makes a sale during dating. I mean, that's obvious, but you don't realize that this is to get you into a relationship and that you didn't really know the real person. You didn't know them. In fact, the woman that was dating my ex had 5 dogs, listened to country music, which is great. That's a great lifestyle. It's a lifestyle my family had that I grew up out of. And my ex, by the way, hated pets and vowed we would never have pets in the house. And he hated country music. Now, why did she think she met the love of her life? And that's her lifestyle, and yet he's making it clear to me as we're preparing to get married that would not be a part of our lifestyle. See, that's what I'm talking about. She really thought she met somebody like that. He mimicked that. He pretended that was true for him when he was in the relationship with her. Now, when he first met me, he pretended some things too that I found out later that weren't true. He pretended that he was into classical music. He also pretended that he was a very deeply spiritual man, and even said at one point he pastored. Is any of that true? I have no idea, nor do I care. The point is, he was trying to prove to me, to get me to like him, that he was like me. He was like me. So what happens is you have these dual realities, the reality of the person that you met, and then the person that you start to live with. The other reality is the person you start to live with. And they're not the same. They're not the same at all. And then you end up thinking, oh, it's because we're having problems. That's why he's not who he was, or she's not who she was. That's why they're angry and irritable and mean. And if I just get my act together and do better, and we have more date nights, or maybe we have more sex, or maybe I listen better, or I work more, I bring more money home, whatever it is that you think that it is that you're going to do to fix this, you do more of trying to fix. What you don't realize is they're creating the confusion because of the duality. They're not who they really are. There's not that authenticity of a single personality. And so you aren't getting to meet them, but the real them keeps slipping through, and that's causing the confusion. So then you end up thinking, I just need to work harder. We need to go therapy. We went to an intensive program for 3 days, which was terribly expensive. And when then we moved to the new country, he ended up getting into therapy. I found my own therapist. We searched for a therapist together. Then we ended up finding a therapist, which he then weaponized the treatment and then got her to fawn all over him, and it corrupted the relationship, and so that it wasn't effective, ultimately causing the whole thing to collapse. So that's back to, this is cognitive dissonance. This confusion and the way that you're taking it on is cognitive dissonance. And it's very hard to break. If you find yourself unable to leave, that's the problem. If you find yourself unsure who you're in a relationship with, that's the problem. If you find yourself post-relationship, but you can't move on because you don't have any closure and you don't know what the hell happened, that's the problem. Are you aware that I have other social media platforms? I have short form videos on TikTok and Instagram, as well as posts on Instagram, and then longer form on YouTube. Recently, I just posted a blind reaction video to TLC's hit show, Unexpected. Be sure to check it out and let me know what you think. You can find me across most platforms at the handle of Carrie McAvoy, PhD. A question came in with, why do I keep missing my ex, my narcissistic ex? Yeah, that's because of a trauma bond. You haven't resolved your trauma bond. What is a trauma bond? Because that's a complicated word that we like to throw out there, but do we ever stop and explain what it is? As I was explaining, when you meet somebody who is pathologically ill, in a sense of have a personality disorder, especially a narcissistic or antisocial personality disorder, and sometimes a borderline personality disorder, not always, but sometimes, due to their fragile ego, they don't really show up. They feel unable to be currently present with you. So they create a false persona in order to have you have a relationship. They want a relationship, but they don't want intimacy, because intimacy is vulnerability, and they don't want vulnerability They want to control, not be vulnerable. So the way to do that is to have the relationship under their control, under their rules. And so what they do is they use intermittent reinforcement. They punish you and reward you for showing up in certain ways. And they won't fully be present, but they expect that out of you. So it's kind of a one-way street. And there's this threat that hangs over you that if you don't quite do it right, they're going to disappear on you. They're going to abandon you. So, you love them. You would feel this niggling fear that one wrong step and this person's out of here. You feel the threat of loss hanging over you. And as a result, because we're hardwired, I know on these platforms, we love to be hard on each other for wanting to be in a relationship. But guys, we are hardwired for belonging. Abraham Maslow on the hierarchy of needs says it is the third rung on the pyramid of needs. The first one is I want to live. I need to breathe and eat and have food. I need shelter so I don't die of the cold. And the very next one is we need to belong. They did studies on monkeys. It's called Harlow's monkeys. If any of you have had any kind of bachelor's in psychology or social work, you probably heard about this. But they took some monkeys, and this is very nice. I'm sorry about this. For those of you who are very sensitive, you want to be a little trigger warning here. They had some of them reared with a mom that was made out of chicken wire, and they had another group that was reared by a mom that was made of terry cloth. So one was soft and one was wiry and hard and cold. Both had bottle nipples for the babies to nurse off of, and they could get food whenever they wanted. And then they watched the socialization of these monkeys. And interestingly, are we not surprised? The ones raised by the chicken wire mom was a disorganized mess. They lacked social structure. They didn't know how to initiate mating protocols. They were excessively aggressive. They were a mess. They needed the socialization of a warm maternal object, whereas the terry cloth mom's babies did better. They've also found this with infants. They found that when you hold your baby and you comfort them and you feed them and nurse them, that their heart rate, all these autonomic conditions like temperature and blood pressure and heart rate lowers and slows and moves back into more normal range. We are hardwired to need belonging. There's something that happens when we're in a connection with each other. Now, what happens is people who are afraid to be intimate use this, somehow innately know that this is a vulnerability of all of us. It's a vulnerability of theirs as well, which is why they guard it so well, that they use that as a threat of withdrawal if we don't participate in the way that we want. Now, what happens is this creates a bond. It doesn't create attachment. Attachment's based on healthy reciprocity and give and take and mutual risk. It develops a bond based on fear. And so you show up out of worries of losing this person and keeping them happy, and that puts you under this person's control, and that's called a trauma bond. It's actually a form, yes, I'm using the word brainwashing. You've been brainwashed. This is what cult leaders use. This is the same tactics that military uses. It's the tactics to kind of break a person down and make them submit to the will of someone else. That's what's happened. So when you get into these relationships and you think you've met somebody and then they start this showing up and then withdrawing and showing up and withdrawing and threatening you and doing all this kind of emotional manipulation, you then begin to work harder and harder to keep them happy, and you get more fearful that you're going to lose them, and you do even more emotional lifting, and that creates the bond. Then what happens though when you get into the relationship, because for them, a narcissist is somebody who's not really dealing with reality. They have this fantasized perception of if somebody loved me and respected me in a certain way and honored me and showed up for me in a certain way, then all my problems would be solved. I'd be fixed. This inner angst that I feel, this inner turmoil that I have would go away. Well, that's not real life. No relationship works like that. And so they get into the relationship with you and they find out that you're human, just like every other person they've ever met is human, and it's not going well, and they become disillusioned. And then the mask starts to drop and you feel the increased building of tension, like, oh shit, it's going wrong. And this person I fear is going to leave me. I can feel now leaving me at some level. And you work harder and you work harder. And so the bond gets more intense. It gets more intense. That's why you can't get this person out of your mind. It's because you've had this connection, this intense bond that you've been living to keep them happy. And unfortunately for you, it puts you on a cocktail of chemicals inside your body that makes you then kind of, I don't really like the word addicted, but I know a lot of us use it. I think it's a good way to sort of like describe it, dynamic, but in a clinical sense, it's really not actually an addiction, but it's similar. You've gotten used to this sense of, build up fear, and then the reward of, they show up and maybe you have a good moment, or maybe you end up having a gift from them or something. And then you build up and things go bad again. And you get into this cycle, you get used to this cycle. And as a result of the cycle, it's extremely hard to break. It's extremely hard to break. And you then carry it with you all the way out even after you leave the relationship. So how do you break all of this? How do you break all of this? Because I know that many of you are asking that. And that's back to what I started talking about today. The way that you break this is you have to settle on who it is that you really met, who it is that you're really in a relationship with. You need to decide on the truth. I know for me, I kept hearing people say to me, listen to what this person says, ignore what they do. Does people who love you talk to other women? No, of course not. They don't. Do people who love you run you down, criticize you, and keep you working, in fact, run you all day without food? No, of course not. They're concerned about my well-being. Does people love you, sit next to you and watch TV until 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, set the alarm 2-3 hours ahead so you don't get enough sleep, even though they know you need 8+ hours of sleep? Do they do that to you? No, they don't. Do people love you, leave you running scared all the time? No, they don't. You should feel safe. But because they say, and this is what mine said, I've never loved anyone the way I've loved you, or I've never worked so hard to have they tell you all this stuff and you think, oh, I want it to be true. I hope it's true. I thought it was true. And that's back to what we started with talking about cognitive dissonance, that mental confusion, that duality of both. It's a both. They love me. They loathe me. They trust me. They're paranoid about me. They say that they want me to be independent, but they control me. I can't, all of that creates a confusion and keeps you trapped. The way to break it is to resolve the confusion and settle on what's true. Someone asked me earlier, and I missed the question. They want to know, how do you know that you are in a relationship with a narcissist? What should you look for that will tell you if this person, your partner, is narcissistic? And I know people get really edgy about this and they get very uncomfortable and feeling it's like you're not a clinician, you shouldn't diagnose, but there are ways for you to recognize them. So these are some things to watch out for. People who have personality disorders, particularly narcissistic personalities, create a chronic state of upsetness. You tend to feel like you're moving from crisis to crisis with this person. I know that when I was in the thick of that relationship, I kept thinking, if we'll get through this drama, then we'll get on steady footing and things will get better, life will calm down. And no, it didn't. It just moved into the next drama and then the next drama. And then, and if it wasn't the drama that he was hitting, he created it. So one of the things to look for is this called chronic upsetness. Another thing you're going to notice is you just don't know what's real, or pieces of details seem to be missing, or it's always, the scope isn't what you thought, it's bigger or different. It's a state of confusion. You're just constantly confused. Part of it's because of the gaslighting that's happening and the deception that's occurring and the manipulation, but also because they just don't see you as a partner in the sense of collaboratively telling you all the details. They don't figure you need to know, so you don't know. So you feel like you're always like catching up and always outside the loop of things. So you feel like there's just this state of confusion. And then this is a really big one. Do you know what a difference between an argument and a disagreement? Or maybe what's the other word for an argument? Argument, yeah, maybe disagreement. Arguments are, and I heard this from Dr. Gregory Lester, so I want to get credit where credit should go to. Dr. Gregory Lester said, arguments, the point of an argument is to transfer my feeling of upsetness to you so that I leave satisfied because now you're upset. That's the only thing that the person's looking for in an argument, just to offload their upsetness to you, their feelings to you. A problem resolution or problem solving is about finding a solution to a problem. You're looking for an answer and you're working together towards it. Maybe you don't agree on how you do it, but you work together to get to a place of agreement of some kind. No, someone just said disagreements always turned into argument. That to me is a sign that you're with somebody who is dysfunctional, because if you're both working towards the goal of resolution, then there's going to be resolution. You'll even agree to disagree. But when it's an argument, they're offloading their upsetness. They want you upset. That's the point. They don't want resolution. They just want you upset. And once you're upset, they walk away feeling better. So when you're living with someone who needs that, who needs this sense of offloading their emotions as a way to solve their emotions, that's a problem. You're probably living with someone who has a personality disorder. Personality disorders, if you really want to cut through it and get past the criterion, yes, you can Google it. There are 9 criteria. You need 5 of them to qualify. But when you dig below all of it, it is a person who lacks the resources to deal with each situation with adaptability and flexibility. So imagine that you're at a job. Say that you're a supervisor at the job. One of your coworkers who can't seem to think out of the box, and whenever a new situation that doesn't quite go to script come up, they just fall apart. How likely are you going to keep that person as an employee? I wouldn't. That creates more work for me. That's not the point of why I hired them. I wanted someone to hired so that my life is easier, not more complicated. But that's what we get when we get into a relationship with somebody who has a pretty significant personality disorder. We've gotten into a relationship with somebody who applies every situation the same. They lack adaptability and they are not flexible. It has to be their way, every time, exactly in the way that they want it, even when it doesn't apply, it doesn't work, and it needs a completely different kind of perspective. Another thing to watch for is how a person makes you feel. You feeling yourself being insecure and edgy, and something just doesn't feel quite right. But the other way to do it, of course, is to go Google the DSM-5 and then look for the 9 criteria and see if they get at least 5 of them. I know that you're like, well, but you need to be a clinician. Yeah, technically a clinician needs to diagnose them. The person needs to be over 18, and it needs to be a chronic style of way of relating. Now, how do you know it's not you? Because they'll say it's you. Here's another big thing. Personality disorders is not a condition. They don't know that they have a problem. And to their opinion, they don't have a problem. They think they're great. They think they're fine. They don't realize that there's this path of chaos behind them. They'll say the problem is you because you don't like the way they're doing things. And so if you would just get on board and shut your mouth, things would get better, right? Well, so ask yourself this. If you're wondering, maybe I'm the narcissist, maybe because they say that I am constantly, maybe I am. Ask yourself this. Before I met this person, did my other relationships were the same? Do I have a history of always, now I know a lot of us get into these repeat relationships because once we get familiar with them, we start to then see it and we find the excitement of them. We mistaken that for excitement as attraction and love. And so we kind of get all confused about that. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your girlfriends, the guys you hang out with. You're talking about work, talking about with family. So think back on all these relationships. Are you the common denominator in all of the relationships of all the problems? If so, then maybe you do need to look at yourself and then go ask a psychologist or psychiatrist or another mental health clinician for help on figuring out what is happening, why all of this is going on. Thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast of Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. It's been wonderful hanging out with you. The webinar with Dr. Milstead on August 18th was incredible. No worries if you forgot to get a ticket or if you're just learning about it now. The replay is available for purchase. To get your copy, see the link in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here with me. Bye-bye.